Lena Thompson believed her blood pressure monitor more than she believed her own body. Every morning at 7, she sat at her kitchen table, wrapped the cuff around her arm, and waited for the familiar buzz and beep. The numbers always came up perfect, 120/80. A healthy range, the nurse at the clinic once told her. She would smile, write the numbers in her notebook, and start her day. But on a warm Thursday in June, the numbers lied. Lena was making breakfast when she felt a strange tightness in her chest. The eggs burned as she reached for the counter. Her vision blurred, and before she could call out, the floor came up fast. The next thing she remembered was a loud voice saying her name. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She opened her eyes to see a paramedic leaning over her. His face was worried, his tone calm but urgent. Her daughter Denise arrived at the hospital before the tests were even finished. The doctor met her in the hallway. "Her pressure was dangerously high," he said. "We had to give her medication right away." Denise frowned. "That cannot be right. She checks it every morning. It is always normal." The doctor shook his head. "Not according to what we just saw." When Lena woke up in the hospital bed, she felt heavy but alert. Denise held her hand. "Mama, the doctor says your pressure was through the roof." Lena blinked in confusion. "That does not make sense. My machine said I was fine." The nurse looked at her gently. "What kind of monitor do you use?" Lena described it, a small white device she bought at the pharmacy last year, covered by her insurance. It had good reviews online and a clean digital screen that showed green when things were good. The nurse nodded slowly. "Those models can sometimes give lower readings for people with darker skin," she said. "The sensors use light to detect your pulse, and darker skin can make the signal harder to read." Lena stared at her. "Are you saying my skin made my numbers wrong?" The nurse hesitated. "It is possible." Lena felt her stomach twist. All this time she had trusted the machine because it was easy. No needles, no waiting rooms, no questions. The green light had become her comfort, her silent friend. But now she realized it had been whispering false reassurances while her blood pressure climbed higher every day. Denise sat beside her, holding a printout of a hospital readings. "These are your real numbers," she said softly. 170/110. You were one step away from a stroke." Lena closed her eyes. The words felt heavy in her chest. She remembered the small warnings she used to ignore, the slight dizziness after climbing stairs, the pounding in her temples. She would take a breath, check her monitor, see the green light, and tell herself everything was fine. Now that same light felt like a betrayal. Later that evening, the doctor came back. He explained that the monitor probably used a type of optical sensor, one that shines a light through the skin to read blood flow. If the light cannot see clearly, it guesses, and those guesses are not always right. Lena listened quietly. "So the machine could not see me right because it was never built for me." The doctor nodded, careful with his words. "Most devices are tested on lighter skin," he said. "They work well for many people, but not for everyone." Lena pressed her lips together. For a long moment, the room was silent, except for the beeping monitor beside her bed. "All my life," she said finally, "I have been told to watch my pressure, to take control of my health. So I did what they said. I bought the machine. I followed the rules, and it still failed me." The doctor placed a hand on her shoulder. "It is not your fault, Miss Thompson. The system is supposed to protect you." But it did not, she thought. When she was discharged 2 days later, the nurse gave her a list of clinics that could check her pressure manually with a real cuff and stethoscope. Lena folded the paper and slipped it into her purse next to her old monitor. She decided she would keep both, one to remind her how fragile trust can be, the other to remind her that being seen clearly is not something she should have to ask for. That night, back home, she sat at her table again. The monitor still looked innocent, blinking softly in the dim kitchen light. She stared at it for a long time before turning it face down. "By the end of this story," she whispered, "people will know that not every green light tells the truth."
Lena never thought much about how her blood pressure monitor worked. You put it on, press a button, and numbers appear. That was all she needed to know. But now, sitting in her living room with her daughter Denise and a cup of tea, she wanted to understand why it had lied to her. Denise opened her laptop and pulled up the manufacturer's website. It showed bright photos of smiling families and neat little slogans about peace of mind. Somewhere near the bottom, in the smallest print, it said, "Uses advanced optical technology for precise results." "What does optical mean?" Lena asked. Denise explained, "It uses light, Mama. A small red light shines through your skin to read how your blood moves. The light bounces back, and the computer inside turns that into a number." Lena frowned. "Light? That sounds like something from a science show." "It is simple in theory," Denise said. "But the problem is that darker skin absorbs more light. The machine needs to see the change in light to measure the pulse. If it cannot see clearly, it guesses." Lena sat back slowly. "So it has been guessing this whole time?" Denise nodded. "Probably." Lena felt a chill. She thought about how many times she had looked at that green light and smiled. At her next appointment, she told Dr. Hill what she had learned. He sighed, folding his hands on the desk. "You are not the first person to ask me that," he said. "A lot of home monitors use these optical sensors. They're cheaper to make, but not always reliable for everyone." "Why are they allowed to sell them then?" Lena asked. He gave her a tired look. "The approval system focuses on whether the device works for most people. If it passes the general test, it gets certified." "Most people," Lena repeated. He nodded. "That usually means the test group is mostly white." Lena's chest tightened. She thought of all the people in her neighborhood who used the same brand. Seniors on fixed incomes, buying what insurance covered, trusting what the pharmacy sold. "So we are the exceptions," she said quietly. Dr. Hill paused, then said, "You are the unseen."
That night, Lena went home and took her old monitor out of the drawer. She turned it over in her hands. On the back it said, Model 3C, manufactured in 2018. Beneath that, in even smaller print, she saw, Made for use on standard skin tones. She stared at those words until they blurred. Standard skin tones. Who's standard? She went online and read articles about how these monitors were tested. The photos of research teams showed no one who looked like her. Most studies used volunteers in Europe or Asia, and the reports never mentioned anything about black skin or older patients. Lena shook her head. No one ever told us our color could hide our danger. Denise joined her on the couch. "Mama, do you remember when the doctor said to check your blood pressure at home twice a day? That was supposed to keep you safe, but the people who made this never thought about your skin." Lena nodded slowly. "I thought I was taking control, but I was giving control to something that did not even see me." Denise took her mother's hand. "Now you know better," she said softly. "Next time, we will double-check at the clinic." Lena smiled faintly. Double-check. That sounded simple, but she knew it meant more than that. It meant never taking one number as the whole truth again. Blood pressure monitors work by detecting how your blood moves under the skin. If the device uses light instead of air pressure, skin tone can affect what it sees. Darker skin can block or scatter the light, leading to lower readings. The machine is not racist, it is incomplete, and incompleteness can be dangerous. If your health depends on a device, learn how the device sees you. She closed the book and looked around her kitchen. The same machine sat quietly on the counter, the one that had smiled green while her body cried for help. She decided she would not throw it away. Instead, she would keep it as proof that numbers are only as honest as the people who design them. Next, Lena learns what the computer missed entirely and why its blind spot was not an accident, but a pattern repeated across the healthcare system.
Lena spent the next week trying to learn more about how the machine had fooled her. She wanted to know what exactly the computer inside that small white box had seen when it looked at her arm, and more importantly, what it had not. She called the customer support line printed on the back of her device. After a few minutes of music, a young man answered. His voice was friendly but mechanical, like he was reading from a script. "Ma'am, our monitors are highly accurate within an acceptable range," he said. "What does acceptable mean?" Lena asked. He paused. "It means within 10 points of the true reading for most users." "Most users?" she repeated slowly. "Does that include people with dark skin?" Another pause. "Our devices are tested on a wide population, ma'am." She sighed. "A wide population does not sound the same as people like me." He cleared his throat. "I understand your concern. If you believe your results are inaccurate, you may return the unit for inspection." Lena thanked him and hung up. She stared at the phone for a moment, then whispered to herself, "They do not even know who they built it for." That night, Denise found a medical article online that explained it in plain terms. The computer reads the reflection of red light under your skin to measure blood flow. When skin has more melanin, less light comes back. The device assumes low reflection means normal pressure, even when it is dangerously high. So the darker the skin, the less accurate the reading. Lena read the sentence twice. It felt like history repeating itself, only this time in pixels and code instead of paper and policy. She remembered her grandmother telling her stories about going to hospitals in the 1950s, where doctors sometimes ignored her pain. They said her body was strong, could handle more. Now, decades later, a machine had learned the same mistake without anyone teaching it. The next morning, Lena brought her old monitor to the clinic. She asked a nurse to compare it to the professional one. The nurse smiled kindly. "Let us see what it says." The clinic monitor showed 165 over 105. Lena's device blinked 128 over 84. The nurse shook her head. "That is a big difference." Lena nodded slowly. "That difference almost killed me." The nurse entered the results into her chart. "This is what we call underestimation. Your device reads too low for your actual pressure." "Why does it do that?" The nurse hesitated. "The computer learned from people who did not look like you."
Lena thought about that on the bus ride home. The idea that a machine could learn from the past sounded strange, but it made sense. It learned from records, from data collected over years, from people whose skin let the light pass through cleanly. It did not mean to ignore her. It simply did not know she existed. But ignorance hurts just as much as intent. She looked around at the other passengers, mostly older folks from her neighborhood, some carrying pharmacy bags, some clutching their own monitors. How many of them were trusting numbers that did not see them either? When she got home, she wrote another line in her notebook. "The computer learns from history, but history forgot us." That evening, a reporter from the local paper called. He had heard about her story through the hospital. He asked if she would be willing to share it for an article about technology bias. "I am no expert," she said. "You were the person it happened to," he replied. "That makes you the expert that matters." She agreed. The article came out the next week under the headline, "The Invisible Gap in Home Health Devices." It explained how many common medical tools had never been properly tested on darker skin tones. The story spread online, and soon other people began to reach out. A man from Georgia wrote, "My mother used the same model and ended up in the hospital too." A woman from Chicago wrote, "I thought it was just me." Lena read their messages and realized something bigger was unfolding. The blind spot was not in her machine alone. It was built into the system that approved it, sold it, and called it safe. She looked at her old monitor again and said quietly, "You missed more than my numbers. You missed my life." The computer was never meant to harm anyone. It was built to help. But when help is trained on incomplete truth, it carries the same bias forward, only faster. Next, Lena will see how policy and people collide when she tries to hold someone accountable for the damage a simple device has caused.
When Lena decided to hold someone accountable, she thought it would be simple. Call the company, tell them what happened, and they would fix it. But nothing in healthcare is simple, not even when you are right. She called the customer service number again and asked to speak with a manager. A woman with a soft but distant voice came on the line. "Ma'am, we are sorry to hear about your experience. Your monitor met all national standards for safety and performance." Lena tried to stay calm. "I was nearly hospitalized because of that machine. My blood pressure was much higher than it showed." The woman replied, "Our policy allows for some variation in readings due to individual differences." "Variation?" Lena repeated. "Is that what you call almost dying?" There was silence on the line. Then the voice returned. "We can offer you a replacement device." Lena hung up without answering. The next day, she called her doctor. Dr. Hill said he could file a product report, but the hospital could not make the company do anything. The device had federal approval. The label said it was safe for home use. "Safe for who?" Lena asked. He sighed. "For whoever they tested it on, I suppose." She could hear the weariness in his voice. Doctors were tired of systems that turned care into paperwork. Later that week, she brought the issue to her insurance representative. They told her the monitor was an approved model under her senior plan. If she wanted a new one, she could apply for reimbursement, but only if the old one was declared defective. "Defective?" she repeated. "The machine works fine. It just works wrong." The representative hesitated. "That is not a category we have." At church that Sunday, she shared the story with her friend Gloria, who worked as a home nurse. Gloria nodded. "Oh, honey, I have seen this before. They call it user variance, but really it is policy shielding profit." Gloria explained that companies often hide behind approval numbers. As long as their device passes the general test, they're covered by insurance contracts. Hospitals, insurers, and manufacturers all point at each other when something goes wrong. "It's a circle," she said. "And inside that circle is the patient, spinning in confusion." Lena sighed. "I am tired of spinning." She decided to write a letter instead. Not angry, just firm. She addressed it to the company's headquarters and sent copies to the state health department and her local news station. In the letter she wrote, "I trusted your monitor because it said it was safe and accurate. It was not. I am not asking for money. I am asking you to test it on people who look like me." She mailed it with a small prayer. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon, a plain envelope arrived. It was from the company. "Dear Miss Thompson, thank you for your feedback. Your experience is important to us. Our devices meet all current federal requirements. Performance may vary based on user characteristics." She read the line 3 times. User characteristics. That was their way of saying skin color without saying it. She placed the letter on the table next to her monitor. 2 pieces of paper, one claiming safety, the other proving danger, both signed by people who would never meet her.
When people like Lena try to challenge technology through official channels, they face walls of polite words. Policy protects the system before it protects the patient. Lena refused to stop there. She called her local senior advocacy group. They connected her to a volunteer named Mr. Harris, who had been researching bias in medical devices. He told her, "We're gathering stories for a public complaint to the FDA. If enough people speak, they have to listen." Lena agreed to add her name. A week later, the group sent in their report with 50 cases of inaccurate readings in black seniors. It was the first time Lena saw her story written in official language. It read, Case 17, female, 68, hypertensive crisis, misread due to optical sensor bias. She smiled. Case 17. She was no longer just one voice on hold. She was part of evidence. That night, she wrote in her notebook, "When the system hides behind policy, find people who know how to break silence." She closed the book and whispered, "They built the policy to protect themselves. We will build community to protect each other." Next, Lena follows the paper trail even further, uncovering how the rules that govern safety were written without the people they were meant to protect.
Lena thought the company letter would be the end of it, but it only made her more determined. Every line in that letter sounded rehearsed, safe, and distant. She wanted facts, not phrases. She decided to look for the paper trail behind her blood pressure monitor. At the library, she met a young volunteer named Tasha who knew how to search public records. Together, they looked up the model name. The first thing they found was a certification file from the Food and Drug Administration. It listed technical terms, approval dates, and a section called Clinical Validation. Lena leaned closer to read. Tested on adults between the ages of 25 and 60. Majority of participants self-identified as Caucasian. She looked at Tasha. "So they never tested it on people my age or my color?" Tasha nodded. "That is what it looks like." There was also a line that said, "Device demonstrated consistent performance in standard skin tones." Lena whispered the words, "Standard skin tones." She felt a cold wave run through her chest. The paper was proof of what she had suspected. The machine was certified not because it worked for everyone, but because no one had bothered to check who it might fail. A few pages later, another note appeared. Manufacturer acknowledges potential variation in readings based on pigmentation. Users are advised to confirm results with clinical measurements. Lena tapped the paper with her pen. So they knew. They wrote it down right here. Tasha sighed. Most people never see this. It is buried in technical files, not on the box or the manual. Lena remembered how the box had promised easy accuracy, nothing about variation or pigment. She thought about all the seniors who bought these devices with their insurance, thinking they were protecting themselves. She felt anger, not for the machine, but for the quietness of the lie. At her next doctor visit, she showed Dr. Hill the document. He adjusted his glasses. "They covered themselves well," he said. "That sentence about pigmentation lets them say they warned consumers, even if no one ever read it. So they admit it might fail, but still call it safe?" He nodded. "Safe for policy, not for people."
Lena called her insurance company again and asked whether they were aware of the warning in the file. The representative sounded surprised. "I do not have that information, ma'am." "Who does?" "That would be the compliance team. I can send a note." "A note," she repeated. "Not a fix, just a note." Later that week, a letter arrived from her insurance provider. It read, "We have reviewed your inquiry. Our records show that the device meets the necessary certification standards. We are unable to comment on internal testing procedures." Lena placed the letter next to the FDA report and the company's earlier reply. 3 papers from 3 different offices, all saying the same thing in different words. Not our fault. She looked at the pile and thought, this is how silence travels, on official paper. When bias hides in policy, it hides in plain sight. Not in hate, but in footnotes. Not in shouting, but in small print. That night, Lena wrote in her notebook, I used to think the problem was my blood pressure. Now I see the problem is their paperwork. She underlined the next sentence twice. If the test never includes you, the approval never protects you. The next day, she shared the files with the senior advocacy group. Mr. Harris smiled sadly. You have found what we call the buried clause, he said. The line that quietly excuses everything. Lena asked, can we show this to someone who will listen? He nodded. We are sending all our documentation to a journalist who covers health policy. Your paper trail will become part of something bigger. She smiled for the first time in days. Maybe that was how change started. Not with shouting, but with paper that told the truth instead of hiding it. Next, Lena discovers that her story is one of thousands and that the issue stretches far beyond her living room. The machine that missed her blood pressure is part of a larger pattern in how technology sees black bodies.
By the time Lena's documents reached the journalist, the pattern had already begun to appear. Each story looked different, but the words inside were the same. Inaccurate readings, missed warnings, dangerous delays. The journalist called her one afternoon. Miss Thompson, we have collected more than 40 similar reports. Every one of them involves a person of color using a home blood pressure monitor. Lena was quiet for a moment. 40, she said softly. And that is just from the people who knew to complain, the reporter added. When the article came out, the headline read, The Numbers That Miss Us. It told stories of men and women in Detroit, Atlanta, and New Orleans who had trusted the same green light only to end up in hospitals with pressure levels far higher than their machines had shown. Lena read every line twice. She felt sad, but also less alone. Her story had company now, and company meant strength. At the next meeting of her church senior group, she brought copies of the article. The group usually talked about recipes and grandchildren, but that day, the table was full of questions. How do we know if our monitors work right? One woman asked. Another man said his readings always came out too low, but he thought it meant he was healthy. Lena told them about her own experience and passed around the list of FDA lines she had found. She explained how to ask for a manual check at the clinic and how to compare results. By the end of the meeting, they decided to start keeping records. Each member would bring their home monitor to church the following Sunday, and a volunteer nurse would test everyone with a manual cuff. They called it the Check Twice Day. The results were sobering. Out of 20 people tested, 12 had home readings at least 15 points lower than the manual test. Most of them were black seniors using the same low-cost models Lena had seen in her neighborhood pharmacy. The nurse shook her head. It is not random, she said. These machines are not failing the system. They are failing the same people over and over. The story spread quickly through nearby churches and community centers. Soon, local health departments began receiving calls asking whether their programs used devices tested for different skin tones. Most had no answer.
A few weeks later, a small nonprofit reached out to Lena. They were conducting a study on racial disparities in medical devices and wanted her help gathering data from real users. She agreed. Together, they visited senior housing buildings, barbershops, and food banks, testing blood pressure monitors against clinical ones. The results mirrored what she had already seen. The numbers for lighter skin tones were accurate within a few points. The numbers for darker skin tones drifted farther and farther off. Lena stood in one hallway, watching an elderly man roll up his sleeve for testing. He looked at her and said, "I thought I was taking care of myself.
Turns out the thing I trusted never saw me." She nodded. "That makes two of us." The nonprofit published its findings. It confirmed that most inexpensive home monitors had never been calibrated for melanin levels. It urged the FDA to require all devices that use light sensors to undergo inclusive testing before approval. When the report was released, it caught national attention. A government agency opened an inquiry. Suddenly, companies that had ignored letters like Lena's were being asked for answers by senators and journalists. Dr. Hill called her to say, "You started something real, Miss Thompson. They are finally talking about device fairness at the national level." Lena laughed softly. About time. The narrator's voice came in over slow images of seniors checking their blood pressure at church tables and clinics. Bias in technology often hides in design, not in intent. It hides in the questions never asked and the tests never run. When a community demands to be seen, the data begins to change shape. That evening, Lena added a new note to her notebook. When you find out you are not the only one, you stop feeling powerless. She underlined it twice, then wrote another line beneath. When enough people speak, silence loses its protection. Next, Lena learns what happens when those voices reach the halls of power, and how real reform begins when patients become teachers.
Lena never expected to speak to people in government buildings, but that was where her story took her next. After the community report made national news, she was invited to a public hearing on medical device standards. The meeting was held in a plain white room in the city hall, the kind with stiff chairs and long microphones. When it was her turn to speak, she stood slowly, holding her notebook in both hands. "My name is Lena Thompson," she began. "A home blood pressure monitor told me I was fine. It was wrong. And I have learned that my skin made it harder for the machine to see me." The officials listened quietly. She explained how the device had been tested, how her doctor had confirmed the problem, and how dozens of others had faced the same danger. "I am not angry," she said. "I am here to make sure no one else is left unseen." When she finished, the room was still for a long moment. Then one of the board members nodded and said, "Thank you, Miss Thompson. We needed to hear that." Over the next few months, the issue of device bias gained attention in Washington. News channels began running stories about heart monitors, oximeters, and fitness watches that performed differently on darker skin. A new bill was introduced requiring inclusive testing before approval. The headlines called it the Device Fairness Act. Dr. Hill called her after seeing it on television. "Look at you," he said, "changing national policy." Lena laughed. "I just told the truth, doctor. The truth did the work." Back in her community, the senior group started something new. They called it Teach the Tech. Each week, volunteers helped older adults learn how to read manuals, look for approval codes, and ask the right questions before buying a device. Lena stood at the front table with her old monitor in hand. She told everyone, "If the box does not say it was tested on diverse skin tones, ask the pharmacist. If they cannot answer, do not buy it." People nodded and took notes. One man said, "I wish I had known this years ago." "You know it now," she replied. "That is what matters."
The nonprofit she had worked with asked her to serve on a patient advisory board. She hesitated at first. "I am just a retired teacher," she said. But the director smiled. "That means you know how to explain things people can understand. We need that more than anything." So she joined. Her job was to review public materials and make sure they were written in plain language. She replaced words like calibration variance with simple phrases like check twice. She insisted that every guide include a line saying, "Tested on all skin tones." It felt good to use her voice for something bigger than frustration. One afternoon, she received a letter from the FDA. It thanked her for her contribution to public feedback and informed her that new labeling guidelines were now in effect. Manufacturers were required to disclose testing diversity in their documentation. Lena read the line twice. For the first time, she felt like the system had not only heard her, but learned from her. That evening, she met with her church group and read the letter aloud. The room erupted in applause. Gloria, the nurse, wiped her eyes. "You did that," she said. "No," Lena replied. "We did. All of us who spoke up." Real change rarely begins with experts. It begins with ordinary people who refuse to stay quiet. When enough stories gather, they become evidence. When enough evidence gathers, it becomes law. Later that week, Lena attended a small ceremony where the nonprofit honored community advocates. They handed her a framed certificate that read, "In gratitude for teaching technology to see every patient." She smiled shyly for the photo. Then she whispered to the woman next to her, "I did not fix the system. I just made it look in the mirror." That night she wrote one more page in her notebook. Who can fix it? People who refuse to wait for permission. She paused, then added another line. How can they fix it? By turning their pain into a plan. She closed the notebook gently. Next, Lena's journey comes full circle. From fear to knowledge, from silence to action, her story becomes a guide for others learning to question the numbers that claim to know them.
A year after the morning her blood pressure monitor lied, Lena Thompson sat once again at her kitchen table. The same sunlight fell through the window, the same clock ticked softly on the wall. But this time, the little machine in front of her was not the same. Her new monitor had a darker cuff and a small label that read, "Tested across all skin tones." The numbers it showed were steady, but Lena no longer took them at face value. Each month, she brought the device to her clinic to compare results. If they matched, she smiled. If they did not, she asked questions. It felt good to ask questions. One Saturday, her church hosted a free health fair. Rows of folding tables lined the gym, each one stacked with pamphlets and water bottles. At the far end, Lena and her senior group set up a table with a big handwritten sign, "Check twice." People stopped by all afternoon. Some came curious, others came scared. Lena greeted each person with the same calm voice. She would ask, "Do you trust your numbers?" Then she would explain what she had learned, how light sensors can misread darker skin, how insurance programs often cover cheap models that are not calibrated for everyone, how to ask for a manual check at the clinic. She spoke slowly, without anger, just honesty. The line at her table never seemed to end. A young nurse from the local hospital approached her. "Miss Thompson," she said, "I read your story online. Because of you, our department now checks devices for accuracy before we send them home with patients." Lena smiled, warm and proud. "That is the kind of news I like." Later, a man in his 70s came forward holding a small white monitor like hers. It said his numbers were normal, but his hands trembled. Lena checked him with the fair's manual cuff. The reading was much higher. She looked him in the eye and said gently, "Trust your body, not just the machine." He nodded with tears forming. That moment reminded her why she had started speaking up in the first place.
As the fair wound down, Lena gathered the leftover papers and held up one sheet. Across the top it read, "The 5 steps to check twice." She read them out loud to the volunteers one more time. Check your monitor at a clinic every 6 months. Use a cuff monitor, not a wrist one. Ask if your device was tested on dark skin. Keep a log and compare results with your doctor. Trust your body more than a number.
Simple words, she said, but strong. She folded the paper and placed it in her notebook, which was now full from cover to cover. Lena's story began with silence and ended with knowledge. A single woman's confusion became a map for others to follow. In teaching others to check twice, she reminded a system built on speed that care still takes time. When she returned home that evening, she placed her notebook on the shelf above the table. Next to it, she kept the old monitor, the one that had once betrayed her. She did not keep it out of anger. She kept it as proof that even mistakes can have purpose if you do not let them repeat. Denise visited the next day. "Mama," she said, "the community center wants to print your guide as a flyer. They will give it to every senior who signs up for blood pressure checks." Lena smiled. "Then maybe my story can keep saving people long after I am gone." She poured 2 cups of tea, sat by the window, and watched the sun move across the street. For the first time in a long while, she felt calm. Not because a machine said she was fine, but because she knew she was seen. Technology keeps learning, and so must we. Machines measure our pulse, but it is our stories that show what those numbers mean. Fairness is not automatic. It is built by people who decide to ask again and again, is this working for everyone? If you have ever trusted a device more than your own body, remember Lena's lesson. Check twice. Speak up, because silence does not protect anyone. Black stories when data meets dignity. Share this story, download the Check Twice guide, subscribe for more true voices that remind technology who it serves.